Should numbers be based on Legionella pneumophila or Legionella species? So at the genus level or other species included. What analytical methods should be used? If molecular methods are used, how would the action levels or thresholds be recalculated? And how do we refine the numbers depending on the type of building, water device, or exposure route? So let's start with this first question. Should numbers be based on Legionella pneumophila or Legionella species? Paul, why don't you start off and give us your sense of this?
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Joe. Well, I must say also in the committee there was a lot of debate on this issue. Should we monitor for pneumophila or for Legionella species? I think there are two important aspects to this question. And that is, if we say we focus on Legionella pneumophila, does that mean that we will miss a lot of other Legionella infections that are occurring? And the second one is, maybe Legionella species monitoring is a very good indicator for Legionella pneumophila. But if you go into the first of these two aspects, so will we miss a lot of Legionella infections when we focus monitoring on Legionella pneumophila? It's good to know that in most countries, it's seen that more than 95% of the Legionella cases that are reported are caused by Legionella pneumophila. But that also has to do with the fact that in a lot of hospitals around the world, people use the urine antigen test to see if somebody is infected with Legionella, and that test only detects Legionella pneumophila. So we still might miss a lot of other Legionella species infections due to that. But there are some countries where they also monitor by cultivating. For instance, in Denmark, if a patient which they suspect to be infected by Legionella, they also try to cultivate. And also in those countries, we see that more than 90% of the cases are caused by Legionella pneumophila. And I also think that the research that has gone into the virulence factors of these species also show that Legionella pneumophila seem to be more virulent than most other Legionella species. So if you look into the science of this, you could say that Legionella pneumophila is for sure a problem, because a lot of people that are going to the hospital with this kind of infections are detected as having Legionella pneumophila. For the other Legionella species, we are not so sure. So there are some indications that might be less, but yeah, maybe we miss them. But still, I think that we should focus on those pathogens that we for sure know that they cause problems. And in this case, it's Legionella pneumophila. So in my opinion, it's good to start focus on Legionella pneumophila monitoring and not so much on Legionella species monitoring. And I think it's already a challenge to get Legionella pneumophila under control. And once we have done that, we can decide to start looking for other Legionella species that might cause disease, or even other opportunistic pathogens that can be present in our premise plumbing. Because I think that Mycobacterium avium or Pseudomonas aeruginosa might even be more important than some of the other Legionella species.
Yes. Chuck, what are your thoughts about this monitoring from your perspective?
Well, I think the key is to be able to monitor frequently and cost effectively. And if a Legionella species methodology facilitates that rather than looking at Legionella pneumophila, I think one shouldn't turn down their noses at that. I certainly agree with Paul that, the Legionella pneumophila is what we know now to dominate the health effects, but we need to temper that with the fact that many clinical cases of pneumonia are not, the etiology is not really known. And so that represents a great uncertainty. But the key is really monitor vulnerable sites with relatively reasonable frequency.
Yeah. And Mark, from the water utilities side, are they interested in some of these other species? I mean, there's 61, and we know at least 6 or 7 have been associated with disease.
Well, I think the question here is, of course, where are you monitoring? In clinical settings, that's where these other Legionella species have been largely associated with illness. So you have in ICUs under cancer, chemotherapy, organ transplants where they're immunocompromised, virtually all of these other Legionella species have been associated with infections in that kind of environment. So now you're talking about, well, is it appropriate to have a target for a distribution system or you know, a building or school where you're outside of this highly immunocompromised setting? So I think I would certainly favor hospitals and nursing home places where clinical environments where we have immunocompromised, high population immunocompromised individuals to do monitoring for all Legionella. As Amy pointed out, more than half have never been associated with illness. So that we're casting a broad net. And as Paul had pointed out, many studies in Europe and around the world, Legionella pneumophila is predominantly the target organism. So I think it's appropriate for distribution systems and buildings to focus on the highest priority would be pneumophila. And now that opens, as Amy pointed out, a lot of commercial methods, simple methods that are rapid and more usable than the ISO, the standard culture method, which in theory detects all Legionella, but in fact studies have shown it was designed predominantly for Legionella pneumophila. And
Mark, that really leads us into this second question, which is, actually, if we can put that up on the screen, what analytical method really should be used, right? Because we've got some that are species specific and some that are genus. So maybe you could address that a bit, and then we'll get to our other panelists on this question.
Sure. What I was saying is that the culture method, people think it detects all Legionella, but in fact, studies have shown it's predominantly focused for Legionella pneumophila, and these other species, it recovers at variable rates.